Hi everyone, it's Agnieszka Murdoch from 5 Minute Language. Welcome to my channel. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already and give this video a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. So today's video is all about learning Japanese, and I know that there are many people who are subscribed to my channel who are learning Japanese because it's a very exciting language to learn. It's actually probably the most interesting language that I have attempted to learn, so I definitely recommend that you learn it. So I'm going to talk to you about how to start learning Japanese and some of the things that I found useful when I started learning Japanese myself. So the first thing I would say is learning about the Japanese syllabaries and the Japanese writing system. So you may be aware that there are three main ways in which you can write Japanese, and there is a reason for that. So there is obviously kanji, which are the traditional characters. There's katakana and hiragana, which are the kind of phonetic syllabaries. And I would definitely recommend that you start by learning hiragana and katakana. And I've got separate videos about how to do that. I also talk in those videos about the fact that hiragana and katakana are actually quite easy to learn. And the reason I recommend it as your first step is because obviously you will need to be able to read a little bit of Japanese to move any further, but also because they are so kind of relatively easy to learn that this can actually motivate you to learn further, because sometimes you can get a bit overwhelmed when it comes to Japanese. It's a very different language if you haven't learned anything like that before. So if you start with learning kanji, you might give up. Whereas if you start with katakana or hiragana, you will see, oh, actually it's easy to progress quickly, and you will have that foundation that you will need to learn vocabulary for later on. In terms of how to learn katakana and hiragana, I definitely recommend using an app. So I personally use Memrise, which is available for free, and you can follow the approach that is used there to learn those two syllabaries. So the next thing is kanji, but like I said, definitely start with hiragana and katakana. Kanji is something that you should be approaching from the start as well. So I think once you've kind of mastered hiragana and katakana, you can do that in a couple of weeks. You can then make a start with kanji. So you can also use apps to learn kanji, and there's lots of different apps available. Often the kanjis are kind of structured around either how simple they are, and you kind of progress from the simple ones to the more difficult ones, or they can be structured around kind of year groups. So for example, the kanjis that you would practice when you're in this school year, and then the kanjis that you would practice the following year, that kind of thing. I personally found that approach really useful because it allows you to learn all the kind of basic words first rather than the basic kanjis, because you will be using those basic words more often. They will come up in writing more often. So even if the kanjis are more complicated, the words are actually useful to learn, and sometimes more useful than the words that are represented by very basic, simple kanjis. Another thing I did that helped me personally was when I was learning a new word or a new kanji, that I would practice writing it in hiragana or katakana phonetically, even if it wasn't supposed to be written that way. So hiragana and katakana are both phonetic syllabaries, and anything that is written in kanji can be written in hiragana and katakana to represent the pronunciation of the word or the structure or the expression. So when you look at a kanji, you won't necessarily know how to pronounce it, but when you look at hiragana and katakana, you will instantly know how it's pronounced because it's phonetic. But the benefit in writing things out, even if they should be written in kanji, is that you can practice writing hiragana and katakana, and that is extremely beneficial as well. So that's something that I did, especially at the start when I didn't know many kanjis, but I did want to practice writing different things, or writing out the words and expressions I was learning, and I knew how they sound, but I didn't necessarily remember the kanji. It helped me immensely in practicing my hiragana and katakana to be able to do that. The next thing you should be doing is familiarizing yourself with the sounds that don't exist in your language. So Japanese is, in my opinion, quite a straightforward language to pronounce for somebody who has learned English, for example. I am a native Polish speaker, and Polish is, some people might disagree with this because it sounds quite crazy, but it is actually an easy to pronounce language. Things are generally pronounced how they're written. It's very phonetic. So for somebody like me, learning Japanese, pronunciation wasn't really an issue because most of the sounds translated into my native language. They existed in my native language, but there will be certain sounds that Japanese people say differently, even if they are represented by the same kind of letter when you want to write them in the Latin script. For example, if you wanted to do that, they would be represented by a letter but actually pronounced very differently. Going back to kanji, you should be learning the correct stroke order. So each kanji is written, in a particular way, in the same way as when you are an English speaker. When you learn to write at school, they teach you how to write the letters, and there is a particular order in which you have to do the strokes. Obviously, then people develop their own ways of writing, but most of the time, when you write the letter P, you do the downward stroke first, and then you do the semicircle, I suppose, from top to bottom rather than the other way around. So learning kanji is a bit like that. You need to memorize the correct way of putting those strokes, and it is part of the learning process, and it does help kind of further down the line. So again, I'm going to emphasize, definitely use an app for learning kanji. There's plenty of different apps to choose from, but I'm not going to go into detail here. The thing to remember about learning kanji is that you are learning kanji, but you are also learning vocabulary kind of alongside it. So there might be different kanjis that you're learning that you will then be able to put together to create new vocabulary items, but those kanjis will have separate meanings on their own. So sometimes you might be learning 10 kanjis, but actually you will know 30 different vocabulary items as a result. So that's kind of slightly different to learning vocabulary in a language like French, where when you learn one word, it can have two meanings, but most of the time it will just have one meaning. So that's a good thing to know, that sometimes learning kanji will allow you to actually expand your vocabulary more than you think. So you should probably be aiming for about 20 kanji per week. And I would say that's perfectly achievable, even for those of you who have very busy lives, and then you can increase that number from there. So see how it goes if you do 20 per week, and then you can always kind of expand that number based on your progress. I would definitely recommend spaced repetition, which is a system for learning and memorizing vocabulary, something that kind of allows you to focus on your weak words or your weak kanjis, and revise them more frequently. And then it also allows you to revise things at intervals to make sure that you actually don't forget the words sort of 2 weeks after you learned them. I've got a separate video about spaced repetition and how exactly to do it and what it means, so I'm going to link that in the description box as well. Make sure you check that out. So the next thing that you will be doing when you're learning Japanese for the first time is you will be looking at the kind of basic concepts of the language, I suppose. And I definitely recommend that you look at different blog posts, and there's plenty of them online. So I'm not going to kind of give you any details of that here. But I would definitely recommend, just searching for how to learn Japanese, how to learn Japanese as a beginner, and there's plenty of blog posts that will set out the basic concepts that you need to know about, such as sentence structure, tenses, particles, and things like that you will just need to kind of understand before you start learning them. I personally found that incredibly helpful, and I hope you will do as well. So the next tip I would give you is to avoid translating as much as you can. I know this can be tricky because obviously when you are only just beginning to learn Japanese, there'll be lots of kanjis that you will have to somehow kind of memorize. But generally, I would recommend that you try to avoid translating things into English directly, because those two languages are very different and things can get a bit confusing. You can also miss a lot of things in terms of context. So I would definitely recommend just learning things in Japanese. So if you're learning a new sentence, just learn that sentence, and you'll kind of know what it means without translating necessarily from your own language into Japanese and the other way around. So the next thing I'm going to say might go kind of slightly against the usual advice I give on this channel. So usually when I talk about learning foreign languages, I encourage people to do it by themselves at home. Obviously you can use different kind of courses and resources, free ones or ones that you have to pay for. But certain languages can definitely be learned independently just by learning vocabulary and reading and listening and so on. But Japanese is different than learning Italian, for example, in that it can be quite overwhelming for somebody who hasn't learned a language, other than kind of a language similar to their own before. So I definitely recommend using a textbook or some kind of program for beginners, because that will give you a little bit of structure and it will show you all the different basic concepts. And then once you become more advanced, you will be able to apply those kind of self-study techniques that I talk about a lot on my channel, and you will be able to progress from there. But I think as a beginner, I definitely recommend kind of like using a textbook or something. The one I use is called Japanese Step by Step. It's probably quite popular. I don't know if you've seen it before, but I found it useful because it sort of explains all the different grammar concepts, and I personally like grammar. I think Japanese is almost like a different way of thinking for me. So for me, it was quite important to understand the kind of theory behind it and the way it's sort of structured. And that's why I found this book quite useful. So that's it. That's basically my tips for beginners. I'm not going to go into any more detail because I think you've got enough there if you haven't started learning Japanese yet. Like I said, I've got a separate video about learning hiragana and katakana, so make sure you start with that. And I also have got a separate video about whether or not Japanese is a difficult language to learn, so you can watch that as well to get a little bit more insight into the language. And let me know why you're thinking of learning Japanese in the comments, and make sure you subscribe to my channel as well. And I'll see you next time. Bye!